Can you hear me? Okay, great. Good afternoon and welcome to Sex Week, even better than Shark Week. Yay! Our third day, and we have continuing programming. Tomorrow we'll have the film Middle Sexes in Kirkhoff 2201 at 4 o'clock, so we invite you to attend that. I'm Colette Segan-Beagley from the Lgbt Resource Center, and I welcome you to this event. You have in your hands some program evaluations. I know these are monotonous, but they're so important because we really do want to create programming that meets your needs and that you enjoy. So please take some time to fill out the demographic portion, that side, and then after it's done, we'll ask you to evaluate the program for us, please. Sex Week, even better than Shark Week, is co-sponsored by the Women's Center, the Dean of Students Office, Women and Gender Studies, Human Resources, the LGBT Faculty and Staff Association, and the student organization Voices for Healthy Choices. At this point, I'd like to ask you to check your cell phones and make sure they're turned off. Thank you. We're so happy to have Jay Friedman with us this afternoon. Jay is a certified sex educator and award-winning writer. He's a former disc jockey and host of a radio talk show on relationships. He has a Master's of Education from University of Vermont and a Bachelor's from Cornell. He coordinated Cornell's male sexuality peer education program entitled How to Be a Better Lover. He's been a multi-year nominee by the National Association for Campus Activities as College Lecturer of the Year. Please help me welcome Jay Friedman.
It was dusk. The two of them were alone in her apartment, in her bedroom, and as they lay entwined in warm embrace, you could hear nothing. Nothing but the occasional sounds of their tranquil breathing. It was very, very quiet. She put her arm behind his head and gently stroked the nape of his neck. Then she pulled him to one breast where he nuzzled her nipple, her erect nipple, first gently with his nose, then licked, tasted, smelled, and absorbed her body odor. It was a hot and a humid day, and they were sweating and perspiring. Slowly, he caressed her one breast as he softly rolled his face over the contours of the other. He then pressed his body close to hers, sighed, and fully spent, rolled over and fell into a deep and satisfying sleep. Ever so slowly, she slipped herself out from under him so as not to disturb him, gently cradled him in her arms, and moved him to his crib. Having completed his 6 o'clock feeding, the 4-month-old baby boy and his mother enjoyed a very restful evening. What were you all thinking about? And I see where your minds are at. And that's why for years I've started with this story. First of all, it shows us that sex is fun to talk about. It's okay for us to laugh while we're learning here today. But secondly, that story challenges us because it shows that all of us are sexual beings from our birth till our death, from the womb to the tomb, and our sexual learning is lifelong as well. Problem is, most of us don't get good information about sex when we're growing up. And I'm like most of you. Parents taught me nothing, school next to nothing. I remember being desperate for information I desired and deserved. I had to turn to things like National Geographic magazine and also the Sears catalog. You know, lingerie ads, page 256. We turn where we can when we're desperate. And a final place that I turned were magazines like Playboy, Playgirl, Penthouse. Though I hear there's this thing called internet porn that's out there now as well. So this stuff is all very much out there. More on these materials later as time allows, but for now let me say that magazines, movies, materials like these are so popular because we have a natural desire to learn about sex. Furthermore, we have a natural desire to enjoy sex. That will be the underlying foundation of our time together. my belief that sex is good. Sex is good. So I'm not another one of those people here to preach at you today that sex is bad, dirty, evil, or filthy. Sex is good. It's what we learn about sex, not so good. I'm a perfect example. Parents taught me nothing, school next to nothing. My only sex education growing up was the VD movie. See, when I was growing up, we called it VD for venereal disease. Today, of course, you know them as STDs or STIs, sexually transmitted diseases or infections. And it was all of us together in a big room. It wasn't like a chapel or anything like that, but a big room with a big screen. And back then it was a slide projector that flashed pictures of genitals covered with herpes, warts, and every other disease imaginable. It was the scare tactic approach to sex, to scare us from ever wanting to do it for the rest of our lives. That doesn't work. Instead, it leaves us ignorant and confused. And as I look around the room here today, at the age of most of you, I was incredibly ignorant and confused. I just didn't know it. You see, I was a typical guy. I thought I knew it all when it came to sex. That's when I faced the greatest crisis of my life. Because at the age of most of you, I remember one day coming home from class, answering the telephone, hearing my girlfriend at the time say 2 words I'll never, ever forget. I'm pregnant. We thought it couldn't happen to us. We thought we knew it all. It changed my life. But it changed my life for the better, because what you'll see here today is that with every crisis comes an opportunity. My opportunity to meet people like you to help you avoid difficult situations like the one that I faced. My opportunity to become a sex educator traveling with the J-Spot program. Now I do this because I could not talk sex when I was in college. Good news, now I'm pretty comfortable talking sex. I mean, I actually get paid to travel all around the country, all around the world, doing nothing but talking sex. Sometimes I still can't believe it. In fact, I can buy things that you folks can probably only dream about. And for me, they're tax-deductible business expenses. Every job has its perks, but if every job has its perks, every job has its downside. For me, the downside comes with the fact that different people have different views and values when it comes to sex. Now, we are entitled to all of our differing views and values. That's part of living in our great democracy. But it makes my job as a sex educator extremely challenging, such that many of my campus visits result in great controversy, sometimes even censorship. So while many people shower me with accolade and acclaim, others get filled with such animosity and attack that they call me things like an agent of the devil, a recovering hippie with perverted ways, or one of the most dangerous people in society, stimulating students into a state of erotic frenzy. We'll see if that happens here today. I am here to stimulate you, but to stimulate your minds, to help us overcome the barriers to communication so that all of us can enjoy happy and healthy sexual lives whenever and however we choose. And this program makes no assumptions about your sexual experience, sexual behavior. This presentation is for all of us. So, the first question for us is, how do we know is the right time to have sex? When is the right time to have sex with someone we know, with someone we've met, with someone we love? And I say there are 3 conditions that you must meet. 3 conditions that all begin with the letter A. Number 1, you are ready to have sex with someone when you can affirm. You can affirm the other person. Now, affirming them means knowing their name, which, given the alcohol thing, it's a good start for some, because all too often we use alcohol as a social lubricant. We only make ignorant and irresponsible decisions as a result. This goes back to our taboo in talking sex. So your challenge here remains to become more comfortable talking sex so you don't have to use alcohol as an excuse. Affirming someone means knowing their name, but it also means being able to do it with the lights on, which might disqualify many of us and our parents and their parents. Everyone who thinks sex is done only in the dark. And affirming them means being able to look them in the eyes. I say if you can't gaze longingly into someone else's eyes, you're not ready to have sex with them. That is the intimacy part of love. So affirming someone means knowing their name, lights on, look them in the eyes, and that's just condition one. Number two, you are ready to have sex with someone when you can accept. You can accept responsibility. Now that's birth control if you need it, disease control if you need it, and obtaining consent. Consent to avoid the date rape problems that plague every campus today. Number three, you are ready to have sex with someone when you can assure. You can assure mutual pleasure. Because you're not in it just for your own pleasure, but you want to bring pleasure to the person you're with. Affirm, accept, assure. 3 conditions that you must meet before you're ready to have sex with someone. Which brings us to our next question. Why is it that so many of us guys seem to always be ready to have sex? What's going on in the minds of us men when it comes to sex? And I say there are 3 reasons that we guys are the way we are when it comes to sex. 3 reasons why even nice guys sometimes make sexual demands on their partners. 3 pressures that we guys face growing up. First pressure is the pressure known as locker room talk. Now, women have this as well, but us guys are great at it. If you think about the way many guys talk sex, it's that locker room language and locker room mentality. In fact, to many guys, this is a picture of sex. The old baseball field, where we go racing around the bases with that locker room talk and scoring mentality, we have an intercourse orientation to sex. As a result, we have many sexually transmitted infections in still near epidemic proportions, and we in the US have the highest rate of teen pregnancy of just about any developed country in the world. A lot of that has to do with that racing around the bases, that locker room talk, that scoring mentality, which leads us to pressure number 2. Because if I'm in a house full of guys, imagine some guys here and they say to me, "So Jay, did you get any last night? Did you score?" And I say to them, "Thanks for asking that thoughtful and sensitive question. Man, that was a cool party last night, and not only was I impressed, but my date was too. Did you see afterward? We went up to my room. It was like a dream come true. We held and cuddled and nurtured each other all night long. It was ecstasy." Now these guys are going to probably be smiling silently, but I have a hunch as I turn my back, I start getting called names. Names like sissy, queer, fag. Which leads us to the second pressure, and what I believe is the greatest pressure that we guys face growing up. The greatest pressure that we face growing up is the pressure known as homophobia. Homophobia, which is not the fear of going home. A lot of us suffer from time to time. And homophobia is not simply fear or hatred of homosexuality. It's a lot more than that. Homophobia is a fear of being perceived as gay. It's a fear of being perceived as gay, and I believe it's the greatest pressure that we guys face growing up. Because for us guys to be called gay, sissy, queer, fag, girl, virgin, wimp, wuss, pansy, homo, those are the worst put-downs that we can hear. Notice we use girl as a put-down. I bet some of you have heard, as I've heard, one little boy call another little boy a girl, or the coach tells the athlete who's injured, "Don't just lie there, walk it off. Don't be a girl." Well, folks, that offends me, because that puts down half of our world's population, our mothers, our daughters, our sisters, perhaps even our partners. But notice how sexism and homophobia get all tied together. Girl, sissy, fag. It makes us guys sometimes do things differently to prove our heterosexuality and masculinity. Think about it. From the way men and women look at their fingernails differently, to the way we cross our legs differently when we sit, to the way we carry our books differently. I remember being in 6th grade, 11, 12 years old, walking home from school one day, minding my own business, when some girl I don't even know stops me and says, "Are you gay?" And all confused, I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because girls carry their books like this. How do boys carry their books?" on the side, right, under the arm. Well, as I got older, I was a smart kid. Not a whole lot going on in the way of relationships, but a lot of books. And I felt like King Kong doing the on-the-side thing to prove my heterosexuality and masculinity. Well, that's cute and all, but sexually it gets scary, because sexually it's where even nice guys sometimes make sexual demands on their partners to such an extent that the average age of first intercourse for inner city boys, first time they're doing it, is 11.8 years old. 11.8 years old. Now, a lot of that has to do with the power and the pressure of homophobia and the need we guys feel to prove that we're real men. Folks, it's not just in the inner cities. It's in our communities and on the campus as well. So we have quickly come to one of the most provocative, controversial, sensitive topics in the whole area of sexuality. And I need to stop here, as I do at every campus, though I think it's less so here than at other places I travel, to say that I understand this topic could be challenging for some of you. Less here than last week in Oklahoma, probably. But it's a tough topic. And we're going to tackle a bunch of tough topics. Your reward for tackling tough topics is that you will get tantalizing tips along the way for your current or your future relationships, for your current or your future sex life. So, those tips will get more provocative as the program goes along. We start simple. Very simple tip to start. One of the keys to a healthy relationship is to be as open and honest as possible. Openness and honesty, key to a healthy relationship. We have known each other now about 15 short minutes. Here is your chance to be open and honest. By show of hands, how many of you, whether for a flickering moment or perhaps in a more ongoing fashion, have wondered what my sexual orientation is? Hands up. Okay, take a look around the room. It's clearly more than half of the house here. Thank you so much. I'm quite flattered. I appreciate it. Now, I'm not trying to take away the natural curiosity that we often have in our society about these things, but note that many in our society who are heterosexual spend time and energy trying to figure out who isn't. And the flip side of this is that many in our society who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgendered sometimes spend time and energy trying to cover that up. And you see that play out all the time on the college campus and in the community in terms of underachievement in class, alcohol and other substance use, depression, violence, and sadly, all too often, suicide. So a big part of our political and cultural climate. I mean, you can barely watch the news on TV or the internet without seeing some story related to homosexuality and homophobia. Think about it. The question as to whether a Harry Potter character might or might not be gay, this was in the news for a while. And about the same time, the question as to whether one of the Teletubbies might or might not be gay, this was in the news for a while. The question as to whether a senator from the state of Idaho did or did not solicit having sex with another man in a Minneapolis airport bathroom, former Senator Larry Craig, he was in the news. And it's amazing how the hypocrisy runs through many of our politicians and our religious leaders, often of the more conservative bent. Who knows who this is? Just the tech guy in the back knows who this is. This is Marcus Bachmann, the other half of presidential candidate Michelle Bachmann. If you don't know, Marcus Bachmann is very involved in a practice that seeks to turn gay men straight, which proves the point that I've been trying to make for years, that it's those who are most homophobic in our society who are most threatened by their own sexuality and most insecure about their own sexuality. I think there is a lot more to be learned about Marcus Bachmann, so stay tuned for that. Another politician in the news, I'm thinking back a number of years ago, I was driving from Wisconsin to Illinois, and on the radio came an interview of Alan Keyes. Here is Alan Keyes. He's a very eloquent, very well-spoken conservative commentator. I admire this man's eloquence, not always his politics. He runs for president almost every presidential election. He's taking this one off because he's still trying to prove that Barack Obama was born in Africa. This is his life pursuit right now. He actually ran for senator of Illinois a number of years ago against Barack Obama, hence the interview. And in the interview, Alan Keyes was asked, "What is your opinion of homosexuality?" And without hesitation, he said, "It's selfish hedonism." Follow-up question, what does that make Mary Cheney, our then vice president's daughter? Alan Keyes said, "She's a sinner." If sex outside of marriage is sinful, selfish hedonism, sign me up. Over 25 years of sinful, selfish hedonism. And then something quite unexpected happened to me not quite so long ago. I got married. Now, I never expected to get married. It wasn't a goal in my life. It wasn't something that my partner or I were striving toward. In fact, both my partner and I were hesitant to enter an institution that is not open to all people in our society. Challenge was that while I lived in Seattle, Washington, my partner lived in Tokyo, Japan. The only way for us to bring our lives together was for one person to move to the other person's country. So as mentioned, not quite so long ago, we got married, and then shortly thereafter, my partner immigrated to America. Now, when you're hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles from home, sometimes just a momentary glimpse of the one you love is enough to sustain you. And maybe that's what love should really be all about. Well, neither of us believes that our heterosexual marriage is in any way threatened by the right of same-sex couples to enter the same institution. Is it possible that so many heterosexuals are threatened by this notion because they fear that same-sex couples are going to get right what heterosexual couples have not been able to get right, to the tune of 50% of marriages in this country ending in divorce? And what is this about the sanctity of marriage anyway? Isn't that the language that always gets used? It's a presidential election coming up. Guarantee you this will get used as a wedge issue, as it always does. The sanctity of marriage? When so many of us are getting our messages about marriage, sex, and relationships from TV programs like Wife Swap and Desperate Housewives and How to Marry a Millionaire, what is that saying about the sanctity of marriage? And by the way, I think one of the great ironies coming up here is that coming up on Wife Swap, I think they're doing like a celebrity wife swap. Reverend Ted Haggard, if you don't know who this is, Google him afterward. He is going to be on Wife Swap, so learn more about that if you don't know. So, we will tackle more tough topics, more tantalizing tips along the way as well. But for now, the third pressure that we guys face growing up is the myth of blue balls. The myth of blue balls. Now, some of you are looking at me a little bit confused, going, blue balls, I'm not quite sure, can I get a definition, please? Whereas typically I've got guys looking at me like, Jay, don't take away our last good excuse. Blue balls, if you don't know, las pelotas azules, les ball blue, whatever language you like. Blue balls is the sensation that when we're sexually aroused, the blood in our bodies goes away from our brains, which is why we don't think or speak very clearly when we're turned on, away from the brains into the genitals. For us guys, it goes into the testes, slang term being balls. We think if we get so turned on we can't stop, if we're not finished off, then we're going to get blue balls, and if we get blue balls, we could explode. Or the partner thinks, turn them on, don't finish them off, blue balls, explosion. If this were true, you'd hear explosions all over this campus every single night. It would be like the 4th of July in late September. Just doesn't happen. Though if it did happen, then women would get blue balls too. Now the women are going, whoa, wait a second, how can this be? Women, like men, when sexually aroused, get blood to the pelvic area. It's called pelvic congestion. If for us guys it's blue balls, maybe for the women it's pink pelvis? I don't know. But I do know this, that yes, it can feel uncomfortable or achy, but no one should feel compelled to finish someone else off. And no one should force someone to do something that they don't want to do sexually. So this is where you need to communicate, negotiate the type of sexual behavior that you're ready for. And if one or the other of you is not ready, that's okay. In fact, if need be, one or the other of you can always go and finish yourself off. We'll let that sink in for just a second. We have such a stigma against masturbation in our society. And yet I hear boys as young as 10 years old, 10-year-old little guys who say, why would anyone masturbate when you can always find some girl ugly enough to have sex with? Folks, these issues of sex and sexism are all tied together. And notice that we start learning from the youngest of ages, but not always in the most appropriate fashion. And by the way, we guys, we get erections all the time. They go away and live to tell. I mean, I could tell you as a history major that there are no known cases in history of guys blowing up from blue balls. In fact, I could tell you personally, I remember myself being in 6th grade, 11, 12 years old. I was going through puberty, and for the longest of times, almost everything I thought about or saw, it was like, oh my goodness, another erection. Which might actually explain why I was carrying my books like this all the time to begin with. And I love when the guys smile and nod in recognition of this story, because most of us guys can relate to this story, whether we say it out loud or not. That's a whole different story. All right, I admit it. I am focusing, at least for the moment, slightly more on the male side of issues, and for that I make no apology. As a sex educator, I know that the vast majority of sex educators are women, and therefore most of us learn about sex only from women. We learn the female perspective and female responsibility, but I'm here to say that men can be responsible, men can be educated. It's just that we guys, we get ripped off in our sex education when we're growing up. It's not our fault as men, it's the way we're brought up. And that's why I'm glad you're all here today, especially the guys. It's why I like to go from time to time to male-dominated campuses. One of those is MIT. MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And for years, I was the first lecturer that all those incoming students, and it's still more male than female, though it's evening out, and I think this is a good thing, but I was the first lecture all these students would receive, and they'd come in late August day, early Saturday morning, looking at me like, why are you here? We are engineers, we are nerds, we have no time or desire for sex. Some of them actually said this to me out loud. And I realize as I'm going along that because they're very intellectual, studious backgrounds, some of them aren't quite getting the information I'm trying to give to them about sex. So I have to reach deep into my bag of tricks and find a way to relate to these engineering technology students, realizing the best way to do this is to talk about sex in terms of math and graphs. Math and graphs, so this may help some of you out as well. If you imagine this stage area now as one very large graph. So here's our big graph, and over here, of course, we have the 0 point. So let's talk about sexual arousal, human sexual response. We'll start with men. Men start at 0, and men are like microwave ovens. That's pretty much our sexual arousal chart right there. Men start at 0, boom, microwave ovens, whereas women start at that same 0 point, but women are like crock pots in terms of sexual arousal. Now, like you, the MIT students, they're finally starting to get it. In fact, MIT students, they whip out their notepads and they start extrapolating the graphs and figuring out the common average and stuff I don't understand. But I've got them hooked, so I continue. Men start at 0, microwave ovens, we reach this point known as orgasm, usually accompanied by ejaculation. And then what happens next on the male graph? Boom, right? Often known as sleep for most of us guys. So the male graph is quite simple. Microwave ovens, boom, it's parabolic to use MIT terminology. Whereas recall, women are like crock pots, so 2, 4, 6 hours later just getting warmed up. Women reach this point known as orgasm, sometimes accompanied by ejaculation. And then what happens next on the female graph? Spoken so proudly too, very good. Now, it could be this for sleep, but yes, for some women it levels off or even dips slightly, only to be followed by another orgasm. And then maybe another. It might be long, it might be short, it might be deep, it might be on the surface. But women have this incredible ability to have multiple orgasms. Which makes me realize Sigmund Freud got it all wrong. You know, Freud talked about penis envy. What's to be envious of this when instead you could have all of this? So now the MIT students, they're totally into it. In fact, they start throwing out these mathematical technology terms at me, one of them being refractory. Great word for our sex lives, refractory. Gets at the whole issue of when do men and women reach their sexual peak. You've heard this. We say men reach their sexual peak at age 18, 19 years old, whereas women reach their sexual peak 27, did I hear? Yeah, but it could be higher, like 30, we say 30, 35, pushing 40 years old. But actually, this is not your sexual peak. Not your sexual peak. Maybe it's more like your genital peak. You see, for women, not all, but for many women, it takes more time to feel comfortable with the body and then comfortable expressing hopes and desires with the partner. Whereas for us guys, it all boils down to the refractory period. Refractory period is the time from when a guy has that orgasm and ejaculation until the time of his next erection. Orgasm to next erection, that is the refractory period. So when a guy is 18, 19 years old, how long is the refractory period? Yeah, 20 minutes, maybe 2 minutes even, right? Whereas when a guy is 38, 39 years old, how long is the refractory period? It's like 2 weeks. No, it's not that bad. Not that bad. In fact, it should only get better as we grow older. Why do we complain when things take more time? We say this about condoms, that condoms take away the feeling. Well, if something prolongs your sexual play, shouldn't we see that as a good thing? In fact, your next tip is going to be the best tip I can tell you on how to make condoms work and feel better. So stay tuned for that. But the MIT students, they loved the lecture. In fact, if we turn the stage now into a map of the United States, from your perspective, MIT is up here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And all throughout New England, students say, Jay, I thought your lecture was controversial and provocative. It's pretty open-minded in New England. In fact, all along the East Coast, it gets trickier as I travel south, but along the East Coast, very open-minded. I live still in Seattle, Washington. All along the West Coast, it's very open-minded. Anywhere you can see the oceans of America tends to be very open-minded when it comes to sex. It's when I start coming to the center of the country that things become more closed-minded and conservative. Some of my biggest challenges as a sex educator have come in states like North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and more on that shortly. But the universal truth I have found as a sex educator is that my audiences demand, desire, and deserve quality information about sex. And the questions I get prove it. Now, you'll have this exact opportunity. After a lecture I did in Chicago, a woman came running up from the back and she said, I gotta know if it's true. If, after I have intercourse with my partner, if I immediately run off to the bathroom and urinate, I can't get pregnant. True or false? False, though not a terribly bad idea, because urinating after intercourse can help many women prevent urinary tract infection. But it does not prevent sexually transmitted disease or infection, does not prevent pregnancy. It kind of reminds me of high schoolers who would constantly ask the question, if after intercourse the woman jumps up and down, do the sperm get all dizzy and confused and can't find the egg? True or false? It's great exercise. Does not prevent pregnancy or disease. Oh, then there was the time in Burlington, Vermont. This big basketball player, a male basketball player, doesn't even wait for me to call on him. He throws up his arm, he says, I gotta know if it's true. Does a guy who performs a lot of oral sex start to grow facial hair really fast? True or false? Best thing about being a sexpert, I'm a sexpert, you are sexperts too. Sexperts are always willing to learn and talk more about sex. I love my job because I don't know it all. There's always something new and interesting to learn. I've not read any research on this question, but my hunch, and I told him this, my hunch is that there's no correlation between the two. I said, probably false. Then suddenly, this other guy on the other side of the room jumps out of his chair, turns his back to me, faces the audience, and says, no, it's true. And he had the fullest, longest beard you could ever imagine. Is everyone all right? Okay, just checking because a couple years back I was in Crookston, Minnesota. I was actually there a couple weeks ago as well. But Crookston, Minnesota is in the northwest corner of Minnesota. It's one of these kind of one traffic light towns, and I had just done the thing about the facial hair and was moving on, and there was a woman kind of front center whose face was turning redder and redder and redder, and it was not just distracting, but I was worried, and I stopped and said, are you okay? And she said, oh, not really. And I said, what's wrong? And she said, I was just thinking about my dad. He has a really long beard. Oh, because our parents never have sex, right? And now this is one of the other great ironies, is that we're as freaked out about the idea of our parents having sex as they are thinking of us, their children, having sex. We are all sexual beings throughout our entire lives. Oh, the question I get asked more than any other question? People always ask, Jay, when was the first time you had sex? When was the first time I had sex? I'll answer that question for you today. First time I remember having sex. Wasn't much long after 6th grade, 12 years old. I was 13 years old. And it was one of the most incredibly mixed up experiences for me. Because when I think back, I remember it was confidence building, and yet confusing, exhilarating, and yet embarrassing, energizing, and yet exhausting. It was happy and yet sad. It was good, but really it was pretty bad. It was thought-provoking. I remember the first thought that went through my mind afterward was, I wonder what it's going to be like when someone else is in the room with me. Which brings us back to the I know you're fighting the image, it's perfectly understandable, but the topic is okay, the topic of masturbation. I mean, our good friend Woody Allen said it best. He said, masturbation, don't knock it, it's sex with someone I love. Masturbation is the ultimate proof that we're all sexual beings, worthy of sexual pleasure, whether we're in a relationship or we're not. It's normal if you do it, it's normal if you don't. So let's talk more about masturbation. 2 challenges on the topic, one for women, one for men. This time around we start with the women, and your challenge is this. I think it's going to be incredibly difficult for those of you as women to enjoy a sexually satisfying relationship with someone else unless you feel comfortable touching your own bodies first. You see, there's more of a stigma against masturbation for women than for men. Part of it is that women's sexual organs are a little bit less accessible. Whereas for us guys, our stuff just kind of hangs out there. Okay, let's make sure we're talking the same language here today. Men have a penis, whereas women have a... very good and very true. Women have a vagina. And often I hear vulva, and yes, women have a vulva, but those are not the corresponding parts. Folks, we are crippled with sexual ignorance. It's amazing what we do not know about our own bodies. Penis and vagina are not the corresponding parts. What is the corresponding part? Clitoris. Very good, the clitoris. But as if it's bad enough that so few people know the clitoris, I actually go places people don't know vagina or vulva. I mean, I actually go places like North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, where people go, vagina, vagina, vagina. That's a state outside of Washington, D.C., isn't it? Or vulva. My parents drive one of those imported cars. And rarely does anyone know the clitoris. The clitoris being the tiny little organ which comes outside and above the vagina, which when stimulated brings great sexual satisfaction to so many women. Notice I said outside and above. It's not in there. Which, by the way, is why penile vaginal intercourse isn't the greatest show on earth for most women, and any good lover knows that and doesn't try for that as the best or only type of sex. But we don't know our own bodies. Check this out. The clitoris, and we all start with a clitoris, even us guys, the clitoris is what elongates for us guys to become the penis. The clitoris is the only part of the body, female or male, designed strictly for pleasure. The challenge I issue to the women here today is to get to know your own bodies. And that's not a homework, that came across a bit homeworky, at your own leisure and comfort, okay? I'm an equal opportunity challenger. So the challenge for the men on this topic is this, that masturbation is a perfect way to practice using condoms. Perfect way to practice using condoms. Because a lot of guys say condoms are a drag and condoms don't feel good. Condoms are like taking a shower with a raincoat on. And I say this to that it's dull lovers, not condoms, that make for dull sex. Problem is, we don't practice alone. Then we find ourselves in a new relationship. We don't have the good communication thing going. Lights are off, so we're fumbling around in the dark. We only try out one brand and it doesn't work out for us, so we get all frustrated and flustered. We throw up our arms and we say, condoms, nah, I don't use condoms. Well, first of all, shopping for a condom should be like shopping for a car. With the hundreds of varieties available in the marketplace, you need to find the make, model, luxuries, and features that feel best to you, and whoever might ride along with you. Secondly, you've got to find ways to make condoms work and feel better. So as promised, I have for you now the best tip I can tell you on how to make condoms work and feel better. I told you these would get more provocative as we go along. In fact, your going away gift is going to be the best tip I can tell you on how to increase your sexual strength and stamina. Now, if you have the stamina to hang on a bit longer, and right before that, bonus, you are going to get to see an excerpt from a Scandinavian sex education video that is basically censored in America. You will get to see an excerpt of that. So good stuff coming up. But now, how to make condoms work and feel better. Here's what you do. Take out a package of condoms, open it very carefully, pull out for yourself one condom. No one will need one this big, okay? And what we learn is you might want to put some lubricant on the outside of the condom. Pop quiz. Should the lubricant be oil-based or water-based? You know this, water-based only. You don't want to get oil-based lubricant on latex. You want to avoid massage oil, baby oil, or Vaseline if you're using latex. So water-based only. Oh, a couple of quick examples, in case you don't know. One of the, and perhaps the most popular water-based lubricant is 2 letters of the alphabet. Sounds like a southern state? Yes, the KY jelly is one of the most popular lubricants that's out there. KY jelly. Oh, that says KY jam. I see the confusion. Should have said jelly. Let's try another one. This one, they say that NASA maybe invented this lubricant to help the astronauts get into their very tight spacesuits. You know this one? It comes in a very sleek, curved bottle. Astroglide, yes, Astroglide is another. Oh, that's an Astroglide bottle, but it seems to say bacon lube. That's a little confusing. Though I like the slogan underneath, keep it sizzling. That's pretty good, isn't it? All right, these are not real. I'm just playing with you because you're spending this part of your day not just with a sex educator, but with a food writer and restaurant reviewer. I am fascinated by the connections between sex and food, and that will be one more playful, provocative part of our program before we leave today. I am going to tell you what some of your favorite foods teach us about sex. These are not real, but if you're looking for flavored or scented lubricants, we have a store in Seattle called Babeland. They're also in New York. They're also online. They have, and there are other places you can get these as well, but they make the Babelicious line of lubricants. My favorite, the peppermint mojito. Definitely recommend the peppermint mojito. Well, a little bit on the outside if you choose, but the secret to making condoms work and feel better is this. Simply flip the condom over, put a small amount, and I'm talking the tiniest of drops, of that same water-based lubricant all the way down inside the reservoir tip, the part that catches the semen during ejaculation. You do this, and using a condom will feel like a whole new ball game. Trust me. But you need to practice alone before you put this into play with somebody else. If you think this is a crazy condom, I will now show you the most unbelievable condom that I've ever seen. Another part of the job I love is people send me stuff. I get the best stuff in the mail. Someone sent me a female condom you've got to see to believe. How many have seen female condoms? Okay, most of you have. If you haven't, I'll quickly, because I think I do have one, yes. First show you the regular female condom, which looks like this. Basically looks like a bloated male condom. And I think it's great when we have new methods in the market. This one hasn't been very popular. It's more expensive, a little trickier to use, and some people complain it makes funny noises during sex. But it's there if you need it. But now the most unbelievable condom I think you'll ever see, will likely never see again because it never made it to market. I got a prototype, and it was to be called the bikini condom. Now the bikini condom was to come in this mylar wrapping, you know, this metallic type stuff. Sometimes it's hard to open the package, so you need to struggle to get this thing open. Once you do, all wadded up at the bottom is a ball of latex. So now in the heat of passion, you need to carefully unfurl this ball of latex. It takes like 10 or 15 minutes to do it right. If you have any passion left at this point, what gets revealed is what looks like, there we go, some sort of latex lingerie, where the woman has to actually step her legs through two of these holes and then insert the sheath into the vagina. I think you could see why this never made it to the marketplace. And by the way, I carry those around in my very handy passport holder. But this is no ordinary passport holder. I picked this up 20-something years ago in Europe. I was riding the trains, the Eurail system. These are being given out, sponsored by the Swedish Family Planning Association. So not just a place for me to stash my cash, keys, passport, but also a safe sex kit that included a sampling of condoms, as well as an assortment of very interesting literature, like this, my favorite brochure. It tells in 6 different languages how to say very useful things like, I love you. I want to sleep with you. I think I might have a disease. You never know what's going to happen on the train, right? Do you think Amtrak is giving out anything like this anytime soon? Not likely. And folks, this demonstrates the difference in views and values between the United States and other countries, especially Northern Europe. Earlier I mentioned the US has the highest rate of teen pregnancy of just about any developed country in the world. Countries like Sweden, Denmark, Belgium, the Netherlands have teen pregnancy rates 5 to 7 times lower than ours, abortion rates lower, STI rates lower, sexual assault rates lower. And it's because countries like those promote open communication about sex, provide quality, comprehensive sex education in the schools. Not to mention that there's much more gender equality in those countries, and there's universal health care as well. Universal health care is probably its own lecture to be dealt with at another time. Check this out. When I was in Scandinavia 20-something years ago, Star Wars was an adult video. Star Wars was an adult video. The government felt it was inappropriate for young children to be exposed to gratuitous violence. Whereas what we would consider softcore pornography, primetime TV in Scandinavia. Children would flip through the channels, they'd reach one of those so-called porn networks, and they'd go, oh look, people making love, no big deal. Compare that to our country, where so many of our parents let us watch excessively violent films until one sex scene comes on, one nude scene comes on, one breast gets exposed. One breast gets exposed. Remind anyone of anything? The 2004 Super Bowl, the whole Janet Jackson incident. Interesting this week when the Michael Jackson court trial has begun, which granted might be a very important thing, but our country is going to become obsessed to this at the point of ignoring more important political issues, I fear. The Janet Jackson case is still tied up in the courts too. The FCC is trying to figure this thing out. The Janet Jackson incident in the Super Bowl, where for that microsecond, if you happen to have caught it live on TV, Janet Jackson had this so-called wardrobe malfunction that titillated our country to no end. The irony being that throughout the Super Bowl broadcast was ad after ad after ad for erectile dysfunction drugs. No one seemed to complain about that, but here you have something that, I don't know, could get some people sexually aroused in a more natural way. We became the laughing stock of the world for our Victorian attitudes related to sex. And it didn't stop there, because later that same year came the 2004 Summer Olympics. And unless you do as I do, and that is to live close to the Canadian border, or maybe you're here from another country, but if not, you did not get to see what I saw. Day one, opening ceremonies, featured a parade of mythological Greek statues. Not statues, but humans dressed as statues. Humans wearing some very tight, form-fitting costumes, some of which silhouetted the genital area. Censored in America, shown to most of the rest of the world. Not surprising, because at the time we had an Attorney General by the name of John Ashcroft. Tradition is held that attorneys general in this country give their press conferences in front of a statue known as the Spirit of Justice. The Spirit of Justice being female with breasts exposed. Ashcroft, and here he is, ordered that thousands of our taxpayer dollars be spent to drape the Spirit of Justice. Our Victorian attitudes related to sex. Even the language is different. When someone in America, especially a woman, has her first sexual experience, what do we say happened to her virginity? She lost her virginity. Isn't that a negative term, to lose something? Compare that to Northern Europe, where you don't lose your virginity. Instead, you make your sexual debut. Isn't that a far more positive perspective on that very first experience? When I was in Denmark 20 years ago, nearly every bus and train station had a huge, huge billboard of a 16-year-old guy, shirtless. Caption underneath said, "I'm not having sex yet, but I'm practicing using condoms while I masturbate." Imagine billboards like this on the highways of Michigan. Would it ever happen? Would it happen anywhere in this country? Not likely. And that's because we live in one of the most sex-negative, sex-repressed, and sex-phobic societies that exists, and I fear it's getting worse. I fear it's getting worse. Politically, in many ways, it's getting worse. Religiously, in some ways, it's getting worse. Educationally, in some ways, it's getting worse. I see signs to this day that say, AIDS kills, sex equals death. I was invited here today to say that sex does not equal death. Sexual ignorance could equal death. AIDS kills and AIDS remains a crisis, but with every crisis comes the opportunity. Your opportunity to learn and talk more about sex. Your opportunity to celebrate outer course. That should be the big O. Outer course, without being focused on any type of specific intercourse. Your opportunity to recognize that your most important lovemaking tools are not between your legs, they're between your ears, your mind and mouth, thinking and talking about sex. And your opportunity to recognize that your largest sexual organ is your skin. That your whole bodies are erogenous, that we shouldn't go searching so desperately for one, maybe it exists and maybe it doesn't, G-spot, but instead recognize that all of us, female and male, are loaded with G-spots. Spots that when touched make us go, gee, that feels great. But we learn the opposite, as I'll show you in this, my favorite cartoon of all time. And if you don't read Norwegian, it says, the erogenous zones of women and men, and on the left you see the woman with all those incredible erogenous zones, and on the right is the man. Well, that's pretty self-explanatory, isn't it? But a good time for me to remind you that it is not our fault as men. Again, it's not our fault as men that we're socialized the way we are when it comes to sex. But it's our fault if we don't change, and all of us, male and female, must change, like I changed. But I changed only after that great crisis in my life, that unexpected, unintended teenage pregnancy. That's when I was shaken to change. I was invited here today to shake you up, to urge, beg, and plead for you to better understand what's going on in our society when it comes to sex, and to urge, beg, and plead for you to learn and talk more about sex. And with that said, I'm going to stop here for a moment, give you a chance to talk. We are going to do a two-part question and answer. And then right after your Q&A, you're going to get those two last pieces I mentioned. There's the censored Scandinavian sex ed video, and then your going away gift, that stamina tip. But I've spoken provocatively for an hour, so part one is a chance for you to ask any question that you would like to ask. I'm not the type who drags out the Q&A, but 3 or 4 would be good, because if you give me 3 or 4, then you're going to love the next 3 or 4 right after that in part 2. No question's a dumb question. First question's often the most courageous. It takes courage to raise your hand and ask the question out loud. So I appreciate whoever has that very first question. Could be about anything I discussed or anything you hoped I might discuss. Thank you.
Guys and girls. Yeah, it's good though. This room echoes. Where would like all those spots be?
Where would all the erogenous zone spots be on males and females? Do you want to answer that question? Everywhere. Exactly. I think it is. It could be anywhere and everywhere. And that's why I love the picture of the female erogenous zones, because, I mean, different people have different parts that they like or dislike. So nibbling on someone's earlobe could be the greatest turn-on for one person, but for the next person, they absolutely detest that. It's painful, they're overly sensitive. It could be a variety of things. So erogenous zones can vary tremendously person to person, but in general, napes of the neck and the earlobes for many, and nipples and inside of the thigh. And I think, interestingly, for males and females, they tend to often be the same place.
No, I work on sources too. Yeah, this is on. It's just we had a lot weird hooked up. Hands come from the press box, so
Great. If you didn't hear the comment, the need here is to communicate. So if you can't ask your partner which part of their body they especially like to have touched, you've got a little bit of an intimacy barrier going on there. So I appreciate your point, because I always say that sex is as much mental and verbal as it is physical. And we're socialized, unfortunately, to think of sex as strictly a physical thing, but it's totally mental and totally verbal. So good question.
just the gain in the body more than actually.
Other questions? Yes.
You can.
What's it like to have sex? Wow, we need another hour for that one. That's a great question.
Okay.
I think I was up at Central Michigan last night, and one of the questions I got was, what's the difference between making love and having sex? Which I think is a little bit of a related question. And I asked the audience to just throw out some words, and connectedness and communication came up again, and closeness. And sex can be, sometimes people ask, Jay, can you have a one-night stand? How do you feel about a one-night stand? And I always say, if you can meet the criteria of the 3 A's, affirm, accept, assure, I'm not one to judge whether a one-night stand is a good thing or a bad thing. It might not fit my moral system, but I don't like to take my morality and impose it and be moralistic on others. But I think that a one-night stand often is ultimately empty and is more the having sex versus making love. And making love is just this total immersion into another person, and it's got spiritual connections if that's at play for you, and it's just a fulfilling feeling, and it's an exciting feeling, and it's a sense of vulnerability because you're just exposed with the other person. And someone at Central asked me last night about mutual masturbation and why don't people talk about mutual masturbation as much, and I think that's like hugely intimate to be with a partner or partners where you're pleasuring yourself, which is something you usually do in private, but now you're doing it together. But wow, that's what sex is. It's just this incredible feeling of putting yourself out there and being vulnerable, but experiencing great pleasure as a result. There's my 2-minute quick, difficult question, but gave it my best shot. We need one more. Just one more question. Yes, thank you. The question is, do guys that dance on a dance floor well, are they better in bed compared to guys that are wallflower stiffs, right? You know, I don't, okay, so that's like the oral sex facial hair thing, because there's no study that I'm aware of on this. It would be a fascinating study to do. But my hunch is that there would be some correlation, because there's sort of a freedom, and dancing on a dance floor is about your ability to really let your body go. And a lot of times sex, and what makes sex exciting, is letting your body go, being in control, and in control of what's comfortable for you, and gaining consent and all that good stuff. But it's also release of inhibitions, and really being able to express yourself, and being able to contort if you're a contortionist, and dance in bed if you're a dancer. I mean, I think there's a natural, potentially researchable connection there. Well, if you had a question that you didn't want to ask out loud, I will be here right afterward, and you're welcome to come up and chat. Part 2 of the Q&A. I mentioned I'm a food writer, fascinated by the connections between sex and food. I do restaurant reviewing. I've written a guidebook in Seattle of restaurants. I write for USA Today a little bit. And I write a column for the Seattle weekly newspaper called Sexy Feast. And in Sexy Feast, I go to a restaurant once a week, and I try to figure out what one dish teaches us about sex. I don't know if the restaurants like me doing this, but I like doing this. Here are a couple of examples. Here we have a pizza. What's the biggest dilemma when it comes to ordering pizza? The toppings, right? Well, if you are by yourself ordering pizza, you can get whatever toppings you love. Sometimes we find our greatest pleasure when we're by ourselves. But if you're with a partner or partners, you need to now communicate and negotiate what type of toppings you want. Same thing happens sexually. Here, my partner and I got a 50-50 split, because variety, I think, is a good part of sex too. So here on the left, you have the margarita or cheese pizza. We'll call this the, for lack of a better term, the missionary part of the pizza. And on the right, you have the arugula egg. We'll call that the experimental part of the pizza. Here we have buffalo chicken wings. Who likes buffalo chicken wings? Who likes the hottest possible buffalo chicken? Just you and me, huh? And a couple. You like them? I want that scorch. I want the scorch. So what does this teach us about sex? Well, there are actually a few places in America that you are not allowed to eat these very spicy chicken wings without signing a form. You have to sign a release form, basically, a waiver saying that you will not sue the restaurant if you burn your mouth or any other part of the body where that wing is going to travel, okay? So what this teaches us about sex is that the path to pleasure often depends upon gaining and giving consent. Consent can be a wonderful thing on the road to pleasure. One more. This is an Ethiopian dish called kitfo. Who knows what kitfo is? Kitfo is ground raw beef. Ground raw beef. Now, lest you be concerned that there's something bad and unhealthy about ground raw beef, note that in this preparation there's a little spiced butter. The spiced butter acts to the beef much like wasabi acts to fish in sushi. It's an antibacterial, and one could argue that spicy food opens up your taste buds. Some people say it destroys the flavors. I think it actually opens up your mouth and your taste buds to experiencing more flavor. So what does kitfo teach us about sex? Well, we're often socialized to buy lingerie and costumes for role play and lubricants and other toys. That's good and all, but sometimes you just want to do it raw. And secondly, how do you eat? How do you eat Ethiopian food? With your hands. No chopsticks creating distance between you and your food. No cold metallic silverware. Instead, what you do is you rip off a piece of this injera bread, and then with the bread you grab some meat, some salad, some vegetables, and you put it in your mouth. It's a very sensual way of eating. Even more sensual is the Ethiopian practice of gursha. In gursha, you rip off the bread, but you also then take the meat and salad, but instead of feeding it to yourself, you put it in the mouth of your partner. We can all benefit from more sensuality in our lives. Well, I would like to hear I got 3 good questions. Now I get to hear 3 of your favorite foods. To limit 1 per person, but raise your hand if you've got a favorite food, and I will have to think quick on my feet and figure out what your favorite food teaches us about sex. Is that a hand up? What is it? Sushi. You like sushi? I love sushi. Sushi. Well, okay, sushi, if you're talking about traditional sushi, like fish on a bed of rice, and there are other types of sushi, but when I think of sushi, I think of nigiri, just the block of fish on the rice. That block of fish is just kind of hanging there for your pleasure, right? And sexually, sometimes it's nice to just hang. Now, you know, I think it's good to be like the communication and to be active. You know, I'm reminded of a joke which isn't a joke. I saw a doctor once who told me about a patient, and he asked the patient, "Are you sexually active?" And she said, "No, I just lie there." Very scary thing. But that said, sometimes sexually it's nice to just lie there and receive. Sometimes sexually it's nice to simply pleasure your partner without expectation of something in return, and that's what the sushi reminds me of. Who's got another one? Chocolate cake. You know, chocolate. I mean, we say chocolate, the whole thing of chocolate being an aphrodisiac, which I don't know what an aphrodisiac necessarily is. I think some things might have sort of chemical stimulation things going on, and sometimes, like artichokes, ripping a leaf and rubbing it against your teeth, sometimes the process can be an aphrodisiac as well. Chocolate, I think part of the answer here is that many people consider it to be arousing and a stimulant and an aphrodisiac. In fact, this goes back to Aztec times. The Aztecs, I think, were the first to discover that chocolate could be an aphrodisiac. In fact, Aztec law said that women were forbidden from eating chocolate. The strength of chocolate so strong that the Aztecs forbid women from eating chocolate. And I think this is when the women's rights movement first began, actually. You know, we think this is a new thing, but it's been a long time coming, right? So I think there's an aphrodisiac thing going on. The other thing is you can play with chocolate. And I got in trouble at one campus for saying this, that you can give your partner a Hershey's Kiss and tell them that the little piece of paper that comes in the foil is a coupon for a real-life kiss. Hey, we're teaching romance as well as sex here because they're all connected together. I was at a Penn State campus, not the big one, and they heard that I was going to talk about Hershey Kisses because I was actually throwing Hershey Kisses to the crowd. And a physics professor said, Jay Friedman is coming to campuses and he's going to have students smearing chocolate all over their bodies. This says more about what goes on in his mind sexually than the reality of what happens in sex education. I saw one more, yeah.
Would a drink count? Like, after saying?
Which drink?
Coffee.
Coffee. I've never been asked to drink. But,
And that tells something?
yeah, it tells me something. When do you like to drink coffee?
Well, in the morning, for sure, but anyway.
Yeah, same with sex, right? We often pigeonhole sex into a particular time of day, but we shouldn't be so pigeonholing, so that's what coffee teaches me about sex. I got to take one more, because I need one more food, so go ahead. Lasagna. Lasagna. Well, I like making lasagna. Part of what's fun about making lasagna is that there are layers. You know, when you make lasagna, it can be a tedious process because you've got a layer, right? You've got the noodle, you got the sauce, you got maybe more than one type of cheese. And do you like meat lasagna? Yeah, then you got to put some ground beef or sausage. So there's layers, and we have layers to ourselves that sometimes in a relationship you need to get through the layers and get closer to someone. But lasagna, it goes in the oven, and when it comes out, the best thing is the cheese has melted and it's like all ooey and gooey and sticky. And the same thing sexually. Some people like their sex to be very neat and clean and organized, and if that's you, great, and find someone that you've got that compatibility with. But some of us like our sex to be ooey, gooey, stainy, melty, sticky, and that can be a really good thing as well. I did get stumped the other day. Someone asked me about watermelon. I got stumped for a while, and then I just envisioned the watermelon, and I thought about also like genetically modified stuff, which I'm very much against. Watermelon should have seeds, and I know there are seedless watermelons, and that's convenient, but I think watermelon should have seeds. Watermelon, when they have seeds, they have white seeds and they have black seeds, which raises the issue of, do you spit or do you swallow? Just saying, just saying. All right, one more. The one I always get asked. I mean, usually I get asked about tacos. I don't know, tacos are a big thing. Because the taco proves that you can put a shell around meat and still have great pleasure. And that shell can be soft or hard, and either way can bring pleasure. But I often get asked about this. Ramen noodles. Now you're looking, and if you've never been to Japan, or a big city that has a really good ramen shop, you don't know the joy of ramen. Ramen is this incredibly sophisticated, elegant, it's so simple and yet complex. It's so full of fat. It's terribly unhealthy, which is what makes it kind of compelling and good. It's this rich, rich dish. So if you ever get a chance to have really good ramen like this one, you gotta go for it. But most of us are more familiar with this type of ramen. It's the national food of poor college students, right? So what does this teach us about sex? Even when you're broke, you can have a good time. Right? Well, we are having a good time here, but some of you could be surprised to have come to a sex lecture and have heard talk of the political and cultural climate. I was at my alma mater, Cornell, and a student came up afterward and she said, "Your lecture was great until you started talking politics." What does politics have to do with sex? And what does sex have to do with politics? And I stopped and I thought for a moment, and only one word came to mind. Everything. Everything. But all too often we don't see the connections between sex and politics. You know, the previous president, and I don't want to spend time rehashing what happened with the previous president, but he had all of these policies that I think were very hurtful. One of them was that he wanted to relabel condom packages. Not to say that they're the best way to prevent against pregnancy or disease, but instead to say that they could be dangerous to your health. The only thing dangerous to your sexual health for 8 years was George W. Bush. Now, things haven't necessarily gotten better, though I'm starting to see a little bit of the change that I was hoping for, finally, with this president, which I think is great, and I think he's finally seeing the light that the opposition doesn't want to do anything that's going to help him. And sex education is under tremendous attack. Some of you may have grown up with these abstinence-only curricula, and I'm the first to affirm abstinence. We all choose to abstain at different times of our lives, but an abstinence-only approach only cripples us with sexual ignorance. And these curricula are full of misinformation and simplistic slogans like, "Do the right thing, wait for the ring." "Don't be a louse, wait for your spouse." "Not on weekdays, only on wed days." Very heterosexist, by the way. "Pet your dog, not your date," which sounds like it promotes bestiality if you think about it too long. "And make believe your date is Jesus." Funny but frightening when you consider that hundreds of millions of our taxpayer dollars are funding these curricula that are in clear violation of the separation of church and state. Sex and sex education are under this tremendous attack. A couple of examples of note recently. This dictionary was pulled off the shelves of a school in California because one or two parents complained that there are one or two words for oral sex in the dictionary. Now, what's the concern? is the concern that little Janie or Johnny is going to thumb through the dictionary, reach the words cunnilingus or fellatio, get so sexually aroused that they want to have a threesome with Merriam and Webster? And where do you draw the line on the absurdity? I mean, do we then take the numbers 6 and 9 out of our numeric system if someone complains about that? Another example, in Kentucky, this book, The Diary of Anne... Are there many more books more important than The Diary of Anne Frank? This book was pulled off the shelves of a school because one parent complained that at one point in the book, Anne makes reference during her puberty to her changing body, makes reference to her vagina. This book got pulled off the shelves of the school. No wonder we see sex as equated with guilt and shame and doubt and fear and negativism, and I refuse to contribute to that. So, before we end on a positive note, I think we should take a moment to thank the program sponsors today for bringing this presentation to campus. I certainly thank all of them. And secondly, if you like the lecture, your homework is to let the sponsors know. Because all too often, I go to campuses where one person complains. That person all too often holds sex education hostage. And it's not just an issue for this program. In life, please take a moment to fight for your sexual rights whenever you can. Now, more positively, we turn back to Europe. In Europe, they have ads like this. Not sure what you're seeing. This is just an ad for sex and food. They have an amazing ice cream. Oh, by the way, did you guys see this? That here in America, Ben & Jerry's just released the Sweaty Balls ice cream. Have you heard of? How many know that skit from Saturday Night Live? If you don't know the skit from Saturday Night Live, you have to go home and go to YouTube and check Sweaty Balls with Alec Baldwin. It's hysterical. So, Ben & Jerry's just released this ice cream, and immediately the American Family Association called for a boycott of Ben & Jerry's. That's how activist the other side is and how uptight they are related to sex. Compare that to London, where there's a group called the Ice Creamists that invented this aphrodisiac ice cream. It's got a hit of absinthe, which many consider an aphrodisiac. It has a sprinkling of Viagra. It has other herbal aphrodisiacs. $20, limit one per person. You have to be 18 or older to buy it. I do not think you'd see something like this in America. Something else you're not likely ever to see unless you're Unitarian or lucky, and Unitarians are often lucky, is this video clip from a Scandinavian sex ed video. So we're going to take a look now. This is a very graphic video. I need to warn you to sex education, and the question on the floor was this: how many of you wish you had had that approach when you were in high school? And virtually every hand goes up. A couple things to note. One, this is not cutting edge stuff. This video is more than 20 years old, so it's not a new thing. Second, I've given you just an excerpt of this, and what I love about the video is its affirmation and its inclusion. Now, there are other parts of this video that talk about birth control and disease prevention, safe for sex, because it came out in the big period of AIDS awareness education. Some of the information wasn't so good, so I had to cut that section out, but it shows different ages. It shows sexual play between same-sex couples, between elderly people, young people, and I love that inclusiveness, and that's again a very non-American or like a Northern European approach. Another thing is that my hotel could be minutes away, and inevitably someone will go to YouTube looking for the rest of this video, and I'm going to save you the trouble. It's simply not available. It's an educational material that's copyrighted, so it doesn't exist. But if you're interested in fun videos like this, if you're interested in keeping up on sexual news, sexual politics, just general stuff related to sex, or Sexy Feast and all that food and sex, you're welcome to join. Did we change the source? Great. You're welcome to join me on Facebook, because I'm posting stuff all the time. So it's very easy to find me. You just go facebook.com and then you do the / my name, Jay Friedman. So easy to remember. J-A-Y, and I like food, Fried Man. Should be easy to remember. And you can do that at Twitter as well, but I don't post quite as much at Twitter. But I'd love to hear from you if you want to come to the Facebook page as well. And this brings us at long last to our much anticipated, long awaited, going away gift, your tip on how to increase your sexual strength and stamina. And your tip is this: practice your Kegels. Practice your Kegels. K-E-G-E-L-S, Kegels. Very few people know what Kegels are. The few that do tend to be women, because women learn that Kegels are an exercise that help with childbirth and delivery. But they're not just for childbirth and delivery, and they're not just for women. Men, if you do your Kegels, just like for the women, it will increase your sexual strength and stamina. So what's a Kegel? Imagine yourself urinating, and for whatever reason you need to suddenly stop the flow of urination. You could do this, right? You just squeeze really tight. Now when you squeeze, you're squeezing a muscle known as the pubococcygeal muscle. Pubococcygeal muscle, we'll call it the PC muscle for short. It is so PC to do your Kegels these days. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to go home, and at some point you're going to think back to this presentation, and you're going to go, oh my gosh, it's Kegel time. Now, not when you're urinating, let me be clear, not when you're urinating, but some other relaxing moment, you want to squeeze that PC muscle. You're going for a 3-second hold. 1 100, 2 100. If you can't go any further, stop right there. Congratulations, you've done a mini Kegel. Because it's like working out. If you haven't been doing these, you don't want to do too many too soon, too fast, because you don't want to rip or tear anything down here. Day 1, mini Kegel. Day 2, 3-second hold. You've now done a full-fledged Kegel. But just like working out, you want to start doing reps of these things. I recommend at least 3 sets of 10 a day. Bare minimum 3 sets of 10. I see the looks. You're like, Jay, I have school, I have a job, I have activities, I have no discipline. How do I remember to do these suddenly all-important Kegels? 2 ideas to help. 1, I have started a national campaign. Sex educator, food writer to you, a national campaign called Kegels with Your Bagels. Kegels with Your Bagels. It's taking off like wildfire in the Jewish community, but the rest have a lot of catching up to do. So my other idea for you is this: the best time to do your Kegels is when you're driving in a car, you reach a red traffic light, perfect amount of time to do your Kegels. I think this is what red traffic lights are for. Now I know you're thinking you're going to be stopped at the red traffic light looking in the car on either side going, wonder what's going on in there. But the best thing about doing your Kegels is no one can tell that you're doing them. I mean, I'm doing mine right now. Stimulating students into a state of erotic frenzy. That's what my opponents claim that I do. And if that's true, I say great. I hope I have stimulated you all here tonight. I hope I've stimulated you to deliberate these issues further, stimulated you to communicate and negotiate further, stimulated you to advocate for your sexual rights, to celebrate positive sexuality, and to masticate bagels for breakfast, maybe starting tomorrow morning. I wish all of you the happiest and healthiest of sexual lives. Thank you for being here today. Thank you. And again, I will be here if you want to come up and chat afterward.
Thank you so much, Jay. We'd love to have you fill out your evaluation, and Anthony will collect them at the back. Please join us tomorrow afternoon at 4 in Kirchhoff 2201 for Middlesexes. Thank you. Please feel free to come talk to Jay.